Have you ever felt invisible? Like you're a ghost in your own life, watching the world move around you, behind a glass you can't seem to break. This is a story about two worlds, separated by just a few inches of glass and 1,000 miles of understanding. It's about how the smallest act of kindness, an act no one is meant to see, can echo in the most powerful of chambers. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thoughts and see how far these stories can travel. The city of Meridian was a symphony of glass and steel, a testament to ambition that clawed its way into the clouds. And at the very heart of that symphony, the principal violin, was the Vance Tower. By day, it was a beehive of frantic energy, home to Croft Global, a firm that moved markets with a single keystroke. Thousands of the city's best and brightest scurried through its marble lobby, their eyes fixed on phones, on futures, on everything but the present moment. But by night, the tower belonged to Art Pendleton. At 68 years old, Art was the tower's ghost. He moved through its cavernous, silent halls not with a chain, but with a bucket and mop. He was the invisible force that erased the day's chaos, polishing away the footprints of CEOs and wiping clean the coffee rings of frantic analysts. He was as much a part of the building's function as its electrical grid, and just as unseen. His shift began at 10 p.m., long after the last designer's suit had hailed a cab home. The building's hum shifted from human to mechanical. The low thrum of servers, the whisper of the ventilation system. These were Art's colleagues. He'd punch his time card, a worn dog-eared piece of cardboard, and begin his slow, methodical journey from the 50th floor down. Tonight, the 50th floor, the executive floor, felt particularly sterile. The air still smelled faintly of expensive cologne and the ghost of a catered lunch. Art pushed his cart, its squeaky wheel a familiar, comforting complaint in the silence. He started with the boardrooms, wiping down vast mahogany tables where fortunes were won and lost. He'd sometimes run his wrinkled finger along the wood's perfect grain, wondering about the men who slammed their fists on it in victory or defeat. To them, he was, at best, a line item on a custodial subcontractor's invoice. His work was a ritual, emptying bins filled with discarded reports, worth more than his monthly rent, cleaning glass partitions that separated people who earned in an hour what he earned in a year. The work was hard on his back, a constant, dull ache that had settled deep into his bones years ago. But Art never complained. He took a quiet pride in the gleam of a freshly waxed floor, in the perfect, streak-free shine of a window overlooking the glittering city. It was his mark. A declaration that, for a few hours at least, this small corner of the world was in perfect order because of him. Around 2 a.m., he took his break. He didn't use the sleek corporate break room with its stainless steel appliances and gourmet coffee machine. It felt like trespassing. Instead, he'd find a quiet utility closet, sit on an overturned bucket, and unwrap his meal. Tonight, it was half of a cheese and tomato sandwich on white bread, lovingly wrapped in wax paper. The other half was in his locker, his lunch for tomorrow's shift. He ate slowly, savoring each bite. As he ate, he pulled a worn photograph from his wallet. It was of his wife, Eleanor. Her smile was wide and genuine, her eyes crinkling at the corners. They had been married for 42 years before a sickness, swift and merciless, had taken her. Well, ill, he'd whisper to the photo, his voice raspy from disuse. They left a real mess in the West Wing conference room. You should have seen it. Paper everywhere. Amateurs. He'd tell her about his night, about the funny, shaped coffee stain he'd found, about the time he found a single, forgotten red glove on a chair. These nightly conversations were his anchor. Eleanor had been the one who saw him. To the world, he was a janitor. To her, he had been Arthur, the man who could fix anything, who told the worst jokes, who loved a good sunset. Losing her was like having the only light in his world switched off. The pension he'd worked 30 years for at the old steel mill had vanished when the company folded. A puff of smoke on a legal document. The small savings they had were devoured by medical bills. So now there was this, the tower, the silence, the photograph. He finished his sandwich, carefully folding the wax paper and putting it in his pocket to reuse. Waste was a luxury he couldn't afford. A deep sigh escaped his lips as he pushed himself up, his knees protesting with a series of loud cracks. The ache in his lower back sharpened. Some nights, the loneliness was a physical weight, heavier than his cleaning cart. He felt every one of his 68 years. He looked out a massive window, down 50 stories to the streets below. The city was a web of light, beautiful and indifferent. Cars moved like corpuscles through its arteries. Each light represented a home, a life, a story. Up here in the silent, empty shrine to wealth, Art felt like he was on a different planet. He was a humble groundskeeper in a palace for gods who had long since gone home. With a final glance at the sleeping city, he picked up his mop. He still had 49 floors to go. He worked not with resentment, but with a quiet, bone-deep resignation. This was his reality. It was a harsh one, but within it, he held on to his small rituals, his memories, and his dignity. It was a fragile shield, but it was all he had. And as he pushed his cart out of the executive suite, leaving it gleaming and perfect for the masters who would return at dawn, the ghost of Vance Tower disappeared once more into the shadows. The rain started just before 6 a.m. as Art was finishing his shift. It wasn't a gentle spring shower. It was a cold, driving rain that lashed against the tower's windows, turning the city lights into a blurry, impressionist painting. Art finished his final checks in the lobby, the marble floors reflecting the stormy dawn like a dark mirror. He punched his time card, the sharp thump, clunk of the machine signaling the end of his workday and the start of his long journey home. Pulling up the collar of his thin, worn jacket, he pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped out into the city's raw breath. The wind cut through his clothes instantly, and the rain felt like tiny needles on his exposed skin. He usually walked the 20 blocks to the bus station. The extra $1 he saved on the subway transfer was the difference between buying milk or going without. But tonight, the walk felt daunting. He hunched his shoulders and began his trek, keeping close to the buildings for what little shelter they offered. The alleys he passed were dark, wet moss, smelling of damp garbage and urban decay. It was in the mouth of one such alley, just behind the Vance Tower, that he heard it. A faint, pathetic sound. A high-pitched, desperate mewing, almost lost in the drumming of the rain. Art stopped. He peered into the darkness, his eyes struggling to adjust. Tucked behind a large, overflowing dumpster was a small, shivering form. It was a cat, a scrawny, matted thing, its fur a mix of orange and mud. One of its ears was torn, and it flinched as another torrent of rain swept into the alley. Its cries were weak, a sound of pure misery. Art's heart, a muscle he often felt had been numbed by time and loss, gave a painful twinge. He knew he should keep walking. He was cold, he was tired, and that bus wasn't going to wait. The world was full of suffering things. You couldn't stop for everyone. But then the cat looked at him. Its eyes, a startling green, seemed to glow in the gloom. They weren't just the eyes of an animal, they were the eyes of every lost and forgotten thing Art had ever seen. He saw a reflection of his own loneliness in them. He took a hesitant step into the alley. "Hey there," he said softly, his voice a low rumble. "You're not having a very good night, are you?" The cat recoiled, arching its back and hissing, a sound that held no real threat, only fear. Art stopped again, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. He knew what he had in his pocket. It was the other half of his cheese and tomato sandwich. His planned meal for tonight, before his next shift. It was the only food he had in the world until his paycheck cleared in 2 days. He thought of the gnawing emptiness he'd feel in his stomach later. It was a familiar feeling, but that didn't make it pleasant. He looked from the sandwich in his mind's eye to the shivering creature in front of him. The choice was simple, and in a way, there was no choice at all. Eleanor had always said he had a heart 2 sizes too big for his own good. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the small, wax paper wrapped square. He unwrapped it slowly. The cat watched his every move, its green eyes wide with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. Art broke the sandwich in half. Then he broke off a small piece of the cheese and tossed it gently onto the cleaner part of the pavement, a few feet from the cat. The cat flinched but didn't run. It watched the morsel, its nose twitching. Finally, its hunger won out over its fear. It darted forward, snatched the cheese, and retreated back to its spot behind the dumpster to devour it. Art smiled, a rare, genuine smile that eased the tired lines around his eyes. He tore the rest of his sandwich half, the larger piece, into small, manageable bites, and placed them on the ground. "Go on," he whispered. "It's all yours. You need it more than I do." He backed away slowly, giving the animal its space. He stood in the pouring rain, soaked to the bone, watching as the stray cat, forgetting its fear for a moment, feasted on the unexpected bounty. For that 1 minute, in that filthy alley, Art didn't feel like a ghost. He felt like a guardian. He had performed a small act of grace in a world that had shown him very little. It was a secret between him, the cat, and the stormy sky. Satisfied, he turned to leave. The ache in his back and the cold in his bones somehow lessened. He didn't expect a reward. He didn't want a witness. The act itself was the point. He was wrong. There was a witness. 50 stories up, in the penthouse office of Croft Global, Elias Vance stood at his floor, took ceiling window, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand. He hadn't gone home. A multi-billion-dollar acquisition deal in Asia had hit a snag, and he'd been on a series of brutal, transatlantic calls for the past 5 hours. He was agitated, his mind a whirlwind of market projections, legal jargon, and risk assessments. He paced his office, a cage of glass and chrome. He hated complications. He hated incompetence. He ran on a simple, ruthless algorithm: efficiency creates profit, profit creates power, power creates order. Everything else was noise. Annoyed, he stared down at the rain-slicked street, watching the storm as if he could intimidate it into stopping. His gaze was drawn to the alleyway beside his building. He had access to a live, high-definition security feed of the entire building perimeter on a tablet on his desk, a feature he'd insisted upon. He flicked it on, zooming in with a swipe of his finger, and he saw it all. He saw the old man, one of the cleaning crew he knew existed, but had never consciously registered. He saw him stop, talk to something, and then pull out that pathetic-looking sandwich. From the clarity of the camera, Elias could see the worn jacket, the weary slump of the man's shoulders. He watched, first with detached curiosity, then with a strange, gripping intensity. He saw the man break his meager meal and give the larger portion to a stray animal. He saw him stand in the downpour, getting soaked, with an expression of what was it? Peace. Elias Vance did not deal in peace. He dealt in leverage, in assets, in human resources that could be optimized or terminated. The world he operated in was a complex machine, and kindness, especially irrational kindness like this, was a faulty gear. It was inefficient. The man gained nothing. He lost his food, he lost time, he risked getting sick. The logical move was to keep walking. But he hadn't. Elias zoomed the camera in on the old man's face as he turned to leave the alley. He saw the faint, gentle smile. It was a smile of profound, untelegraphed contentment. It struck Elias with the force of a physical blow. He looked at his own reflection in the glass, the scotch in his hand, the billion-dollar view at his back. He had everything. He could buy cities, shape industries, ruin rivals with a phone call. But he couldn't remember the last time he had smiled like that. He couldn't remember the last time he'd done something for no reason other than that it felt right. The janitor, this anonymous old man, had made a transaction where he was the only loser on the balance sheet. And yet, he walked away looking richer than Elias felt. The image of the janitor sharing his sandwich with the cat burned itself into Elias Vance's mind. The deal in Asia, the stock prices, the legal threats. It all suddenly felt small, trivial. A crack had just appeared in the flawless glass of his worldview, and a cold, unfamiliar wind was blowing through it. He stood there, motionless, long after Art had disappeared around the corner, staring at the empty alley on his screen. The next day, the image of the old janitor haunted Elias Vance. It followed him from his minimalist penthouse apartment to his chauffeured limousine, and into the very heart of his empire. The world looked different. The usual thrill of power, the hum of control that fueled him, felt muted, replaced by a low, persistent frequency of something else. Doubt. He sat in a morning board meeting, surrounded by his top executives. They were talking about Q3 projections, about synergizing assets, and optimizing the workforce. A clean, bloodless euphemism for laying off 200 employees at a subsidiary plant in Ohio. Elias had approved dozens of such plans. It was just business. You trim the fat to keep the body healthy. But today, the words sounded hollow, obscene. He looked at the faces of his VPs, sharp, ambitious, hungry people he had personally selected for their ruthlessness. He saw himself in them. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if he liked the reflection. While they were discussing the precise financial benefits of ruining 200 lives, his mind kept replaying the scene in the alley. The rain, the shivering cat, and the quiet, unquestioning generosity of a man who had next to nothing. That man was likely a prime candidate for optimization. His subcontractor's contract was probably the cheapest they could find. Was he one of the metaphorical pieces of fat they were always so eager to trim? Elias, are we in agreement on the timeline? Elias blinked, pulled from his reverie. His second in command, a man named Marcus, was looking at him expectantly. The entire boardroom was silent, their eyes on him. He felt a flash of irritation at his own distraction. "The timeline is too slow," Elias snapped, his voice colder than he intended. "If the dead weight is affecting the bottom line, cut it. Now. Why is this even a discussion?" The executives nodded, scribbling notes. The old Elias was back, but it was a performance. Inside, a battle was raging. His entire life had been built on a single, unwavering belief: value is measured in dollars and cents. Strength is survival. Weakness is liability. The Janitor's Act defied that entire philosophy. It was an act of profound strength disguised as weakness. It was value that couldn't be quantified, and it was driving him mad. He dismissed the board meeting abruptly. Alone in his office, he walked back to the window overlooking the alley. It was just an alley, empty and mundane in the daylight. But he could still see the ghost of the scene. He buzzed his executive assistant. "Sarah, get me the file on the overnight custodial staff." "The contractor's file, Mr. Vance?" she asked, her voice laced with surprise. "Yes. I want to know who was on duty last night. Specifically, the janitor who handles the executive floors. I want a name." "Of course, sir." An hour later, a file was on his desk. He opened it. The contractor was some faceless entity called City-Wide Cleaners, and inside was a list of employees. He scanned the names. Arthur Pendleton, age 68, start date 4 years ago. No other details, just a name and a number. Arthur Pendleton. The name felt solid, old-fashioned. Now came the real dilemma. What was he going to do? The impulse of his world, the world of Elias Vance, was simple: solve the problem with money. He could have Sarah arrange a massive, anonymous bonus. He could cut a check for $50,000, $100,000. It was pocket change. It would be easy, clean, transactional. He could buy the man a new life and, in doing so, buy back his own peace of mind. He could close the loop, file the memory away as handled. But the thought felt cheap. It felt like an insult. Giving him money would turn his selfless act into a service rendered. It would put a price tag on his dignity. It would be like paying for a painting, not because you loved it, but because you wanted to own it. The janitor hadn't been looking for a reward. Anonymity was part of the act's purity. To suddenly appear as a wealthy benefactor felt vulgar. It would make the man a project, a charity case, and rob him of the very agency Elias had unknowingly admired. He was stuck. For the first time in his professional life, the most direct solution, money, felt like the wrong one. He felt a frustrating, impotent anger. He, Elias Vance, who could move mountains of capital across continents, was paralyzed by how to properly acknowledge a single, quiet act of kindness. He spent the rest of the day in a fog. He was short with his staff, his focus fractured. He found himself looking at the people in his building differently. The baristas, the security guards, the mailroom clerks. Had he ever truly seen them before? Or had they just been part of the scenery, functional elements in his world? Arthur Pendleton had been one of them, a ghost. But now he was real, and his reality was making Elias question the very foundations of his own. That evening he had an idea. It was a solution that felt more elegant, more systemic. He wouldn't just help this one man. He would use his own system to do it. He had a system for everything after all. Years ago, for PR purposes and a hefty tax benefit, he had established the Froft Cares Foundation, a philanthropic entity designed to give back to the community and support company employees in need. It was perfect. He could use the foundation to discover, Arthur Pendleton's plight and lift him up. It would be official, dignified, and would operate under the guise of corporate benevolence. The man would receive help not from a prying billionaire who had spied on him, but from the caring, impersonal institution he worked for. It would validate the foundation's existence and solve his personal dilemma without the messiness of a direct, personal encounter. He called Caroline Finch, the director of the foundation. "Caroline," he said, his voice crisp and decisive once more. "I have a new initiative for you. I want you to do a deep dive into the well-being of our subcontracted service staff. The cleaners, the security, everyone. I want to find individuals who are facing hardship and could benefit from the Uplift program. Start with the overnight custodial crew from city-wide. I want you to be proactive. Find someone who deserves it." "That's a wonderful idea, Elias," Caroline said, her voice brimming with professional enthusiasm. "We'll have a robust framework for identifying and vetting candidates. I'll get the process started immediately." Elias hung up, a wave of relief washing over him. The problem was delegated. The system was engaged. He had found a way to reward the janitor's soul without cheapening it with his own money. He had turned an emotional problem into a logistical one. And in the world of Elias Vance, logistical problems always had solutions. He had set his perfect, well-oiled machine in motion. He had no idea he had just handed a lit match to a bureaucrat and pointed her toward a powder keg. Caroline Finch was a woman who loved rules. She believed in them the way a priest believes in scripture. Rules created order. They ensured fairness. They eliminated messy things like bias, nepotism, and emotion. The Vance Employee Uplift Program was her masterpiece of bureaucracy, a multi-stage data-driven process for dispensing aid. It was designed to be unimpeachably objective. And in its objectivity, it was profoundly blind. Following Elias Vance's directive, she began her deep dive. This consisted of sending a dry, jargon-filled memo to the manager at city-wide cleaners, requesting that he encourage his employees to apply for the program. The memo came with a link to a 9-page digital application form. A few days later, Art's supervisor, a harried man named Dave, pulled him aside before his shift. "Hey, Art, big news. The guys upstairs at Croft, they're offering some kind of grant or something. For people in a tough spot. You should apply." Said it's called the Uplift Program. Art was hesitant. He wasn't one for handouts. "I'm all right, Dave," he said quietly. "Don't be a mule, Art." Dave insisted, clapping him on the shoulder. "This is from the top, Mr. Vance himself. It's for us. When do guys like that ever give a damn about guys like us? You gotta shoot your shot." The idea that Mr. Vance, a name Art only knew from the giant silver letters on the building, would care about him seemed preposterous, but Eleanor had always told him to never let pride get in the way of a blessing. With Dave's help, he navigated the online application on the supervisor's grimy office computer. The form was a nightmare. It asked for a permanent address. Art's informal, cash-only rooming house arrangement didn't count. A credit score, his was non-existent, and bank statements for the last 3 years. He operated exclusively in cash. His meager pay cashed at a check-cashing store that took a greedy percentage. He answered as best he could, his honest, simple answers looking stark and inadequate in the neatly formatted digital boxes. He wrote about losing his pension, about Eleanor's medical bills, about the simple desire for a small, secure apartment where the heating worked in the winter. He submitted it, feeling a small, unfamiliar flicker of hope. A week later, he was granted an interview. He was told to report to the 35th floor, the home of the Croft-Cares Foundation. He'd never been on that floor during the day. He wore his best pants, still worn, but clean, and a button-up shirt Eleanor had bought him years ago. He felt deeply out of place as impeccably dressed young professionals bustled past him, not even registering his presence. He sat across a polished desk from Caroline Finch. She gave him a tight, professional smile. "Thank you for coming in, Mr. Pendleton." In front of her was a tablet displaying his application, littered with red flags and exclamation points generated by her vetting software. "Please, call me Art," he said softly. "Arthur," she corrected, preferring the formality of the file. "I've reviewed your application. The Foundation has a mandate to provide a hand-up, not a handout. We look for candidates who demonstrate fiscal responsibility and a viable path toward self-sufficiency." She began her questions, her tone never unkind, but detached clinical. "It says here you have no official lease agreement. Can you explain your living situation?" "I rent a room from a lady, Mrs. Gable. I pay her in cash every Friday." Caroline made a note. "I see. And no bank account. How do you manage your finances?" "I pay for things as I get them," Art explained simply. "Bus pass, food, my rent. There's not much left to manage." "And your credit history appears to be non-existent. Have you ever taken out a loan? A credit card?" Art shook his head. "Never trusted banks much, Mom. Not after my pension." "Yes, the pension," she cut in, looking at her screen. "The documentation you provided from the mill's closure is incomplete. Our protocol requires a certified letter from the administrators, which are now defunct." The questions continued, a slow, methodical dismantling of his life. Each answer he gave, born of necessity and poverty, was translated by her into a mark of failure. His cash economy was financial instability. His lack of credit was fiscal immaturity. His informal housing was transient. He wasn't a person in a difficult situation. He was a collection of risk factors. He left the interview feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his life. The flicker of hope had been extinguished, replaced by a familiar sense of shame. He had been weighed, measured, and found wanting by the very system designed to help him. 2 days later, an automated email arrived in his supervisor's inbox. It was addressed to Arthur Pendleton. It was a form letter. "After careful consideration of all applicants, we regret to inform you that your profile does not meet the necessary criteria for the Uplift program at this time. We thank you for your interest and wish you the best in your future endeavors." The system had worked perfectly. It had identified the candidate, processed him, and rejected him based on the cold, hard data. The fact that the data was a direct symptom of the problem he needed help with was an irony the system was not programmed to understand. Meanwhile, Elias Vance was waiting. He'd given the Foundation 2 weeks, assuming the process would be swift. He finally called Caroline for an update. "Yes, the custodial staff initiative," she said, pulling up her files. "It was very successful. We had several applicants and found a wonderful candidate. A young single mother working for the daytime security team. Very promising. We're setting her up with financial literacy courses and a subsidized apartment." Elias felt a surge of pride. "That's excellent, Caroline. Excellent." Then he paused. "And what about the others? What about the old man from the night crew? Arthur Pendleton?" There was a slight hesitation on the line. "Oh, yes. Him. Unfortunately, he was not a viable candidate. Elias. A number of red flags. No stable housing, no credit, cash, based everything. Frankly, he presented as a high-risk allocation. Giving him a large sum of money would have been irresponsible. He didn't meet the criteria. The line went silent. Elias could feel the blood draining from his face, replaced by a hot rising tide of fury. He didn't meet the criteria. He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. No, our framework is very clear. Your framework. Elias interrupted, his voice like ice. Your framework rejected a man because he's poor. You're telling me that my foundation, the Croft Cares Foundation, denied help to a man because he desperately needs help. Is that what you're telling me, Caroline? Well, when you put it that way, it sounds like the most profound failure I have ever witnessed. Elias roared, slamming his fist on his desk so hard his glass of water jumped. I created that program to feel good about what we do here, and you've turned it into an insult! A cruel, bureaucratic joke! He didn't fail your criteria, Caroline. Your criteria failed him. He hung up the phone, his hand trembling with a rage he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just anger at Caroline. It was anger at himself. He had tried to solve a human problem with an inhuman solution. He had built a beautiful, gleaming, high-tech machine designed to find and polish gems, and he had just discovered that its first act was to take the most genuine diamond he had ever seen and classify it as worthless gravel. The irony was suffocating. He, the master of systems, had been betrayed by his own. He looked out the window, down at the city lights that were beginning to flicker on. Down there, Arthur Pendleton was probably getting ready for another night of work, unaware that he had been judged and dismissed by a phantom committee, unaware that the man who had witnessed his grace had then subjected him to this cold, humiliating process. The shame Elias felt was immense. He knew then that he couldn't hide behind his money or his systems any longer. This was a debt he would have to pay in person. That night, Elias Vance did not go home. He didn't work. He simply waited. He watched the clock on his wall, each tick a small hammer against the silence. 10 p.m. came and went. He imagined Art punching his time card, starting his long, lonely patrol of the empty floors. He waited through the deep hours of the night, a silent vigil in his glass cage. At 6:05 a.m., he took the elevator down to the lobby. He wasn't wearing his usual $1,000 suit. He had changed into a simple pair of dark trousers and a plain gray sweater, clothes he hadn't worn in years. He wanted to meet Art not as a CEO, but as a man. He stood near the main entrance, feeling strangely nervous. A few moments later, the heavy glass doors opened, and Art Pendleton walked out, pulling up the collar of his thin jacket against the morning chill. He looked even more tired than usual, the rejection from the foundation having settled on him like another layer of dust. Arthur. Art stopped and turned. He saw the man standing there and felt a jolt of confusion. He recognized him. He had seen his picture everywhere. This was Elias Vance, the king of the castle. Art's first thought was that he was in trouble, that he had done something wrong. He braced himself. "Mr. Vance, sir," Art said, his voice barely a whisper. "Please," Elias said, taking a step forward, "call me Elias." He looked directly into Art's eyes. They were wary but clear and kind, just as he had imagined. "I need to talk to you for a moment, if you have the time." Art simply nodded, too stunned to speak. Elias gestured to a small, all-night cafe across the street. Can I buy you a cup of coffee? Sitting in a worn vinyl booth, a thick ceramic mug warming his hands, Art felt like he was in a dream. Elias Vance sat across from him, looking uncomfortable and out of place, yet his gaze was direct and sincere. Arthur, Elias began, his voice low. Something happened last week. I saw something. I was in my office, working late. It was raining. Art looked at him, his brow furrowed in confusion. I have a security camera that covers the alley behind the building. Elias continued, the words coming out in a rush of confession. I saw you. With the cat. I saw you give it your sandwich. Art's face flushed with color. He felt a strange mix of embarrassment and shock. That private, simple moment had been observed. He didn't know what to say. It was nothing, sir. Just a stray. No, Elias said, leaning forward, his voice filled with an intensity that startled Art. It wasn't nothing. Do you understand? It was the most important thing I have seen in years. He then told Art everything. He told him about his own feelings of emptiness, about how Art's simple act of kindness had shaken him to his core. And then, his face tightening with shame, he told him about the foundation. He told him how he had tried to help from a distance, and how his own broken, bureaucratic system had failed Art so profoundly. I set up a test for my company to prove it had a heart, Elias said, his voice thick with emotion. And it failed. I failed. That letter of rejection you received, it is the greatest shame of my career. I am so deeply, truly sorry. Art listened, his mind reeling. He saw the genuine anguish on the face of this powerful man, and his own feelings of shame and rejection began to melt away, replaced by a profound sense of astonishment. All this turmoil over him, over a half-eaten sandwich. You don't need to apologize to me, sir, Art said quietly, finding his voice. You didn't know. But I should have known, Elias insisted. I built the system. It's my name on the tower. What good is all this? He gestured vaguely, indicating the entire world of wealth and power. If it's blind to simple goodness, what good is a foundation that can't recognize the very person it was meant for? This was the catharsis. Not in a boardroom, not with a check, but here, in a cheap diner, over coffee. A raw, honest admission of failure from a man who never failed. A powerful man finally seeing the invisible man. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Elias slid a small set of keys across the table. This isn't charity, Art, he said firmly. This is a job offer. The Croft Cares Foundation is broken. Its director has been reassigned. The entire Uplift program is being scrapped. I am going to rebuild it from the ground up, and I need someone to help me, someone who understands what it's actually like to need help. Someone who understands dignity. Art stared at the keys. I'm a janitor, Mr. Vance. You were a janitor, Elias corrected him. Now, you're the first paid member of the new Foundation Advisory Board. Your job is to tell us the truth, to vet our ideas, to make sure we never make a mistake like this again. The keys, he added, with a small smile. Here for a fully furnished, 2-bedroom apartment a few blocks from here. It's part of the compensation package. The company owns the building. The heat works. Tears welled in Art's eyes, tears he hadn't shed since Eleanor passed. They weren't tears of sadness, but of overwhelming, unbelievable gratitude. It wasn't just the apartment or the money. It was the recognition, the purpose. He was being handed not just a home, but a voice. There's one more thing, Elias said, sliding a corporate credit card across the table. Your first official task for the foundation. I want you to go back to that alley, Find that cat. Take it to the best vet in the city, get it all its shots, and whatever else it needs. No expense spared. I want a full report on my desk by Monday. Sometimes, the most powerful man in the room isn't the one with the most money. It's the one with the biggest heart. A little bit of light, no matter how small, can always find a way to break through the dark.